She utterly hated Stewart Granger. Now we know the reason why Barbara Stanwyck never minced words. But when she called him the most insufferable man I ever worked with, everyone in Hollywood knew exactly how deep that wound went. Barbara Stanwyck was born Ruby Catherine Stevens on July 16, 1907 in Brooklyn, New York. Unlike many of her Hollywood contemporaries who came from comfortable backgrounds, Stanwyck's early years were marked by hardship and struggle. Her mother died when she was only 4 years old, and her father abandoned the family shortly afterward, leaving Ruby and her siblings to be raised by various foster homes and older sisters. This difficult childhood would forge in her a toughness and resilience that became her trademark both on-screen and off. By the age of 15, Ruby Stevens was working as a chorus girl, dancing in speakeasies and nightclubs during the Roaring Twenties. She changed her name to Barbara Stanwyck after a theatrical producer suggested it had more star power, and she never looked back. Her Broadway debut came in 1926, but it was her electrifying performance in the play The Noose in 1927 that caught the attention of Hollywood scouts. Unlike many actresses of her era who relied solely on beauty, Stanwyck brought raw authenticity and emotional depth to every role. She arrived in Hollywood in 1929, just as the silent film era was giving way to talkies, and her distinctive voice, combined with her expressive face and natural acting style, made her an immediate sensation. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, Barbara Stanwyck established herself as one of the most versatile and hardworking actresses in Hollywood. She could play anything. Tough-talking dames in film noir, sophisticated socialites in comedies, vulnerable women in melodramas, and even Western heroines with equal conviction. Her filmography during this golden period reads like a masterclass in American cinema. In Frank Capra's Meet John Doe, 1941, she played a cynical reporter with a conscience. In Double Indemnity, 1944, directed by Billy Wilder, she delivered one of the most iconic femme fatale performances in film history as the murderous Phyllis Dietrichson, a role that earned her an Academy Award nomination and cemented her status as a noir legend. She worked tirelessly, often appearing in 4 or 5 films a year, and directors loved her because she came to set prepared, hit her marks perfectly, and never complained about long hours or difficult conditions. "I just show up and do the work," she would say with characteristic modesty. But behind that work ethic was a woman who demanded respect and professionalism from everyone around her. Stanwyck had clawed her way up from nothing, and she had no patience for actors who took their privileged positions for granted. Her personal life was equally eventful. In 1928, she married vaudeville comedian Frank Fay, a union that would prove turbulent and painful. Fay was a talented performer but also a deeply troubled man whose jealousy of Stanwyck's rising success turned him cruel and controlling. Friends reported that he belittled her achievements and became increasingly difficult as her star eclipsed his. After 7 years of marriage and the adoption of their son, Dion, in 1932, Stanwyck finally divorced Fay in 1935. She later described those years as some of the darkest of her life, but true to her character, she rarely spoke publicly about the abuse she endured. In 1939, Stanwyck found happiness again when she married actor Robert Taylor, one of Hollywood's most handsome leading men. Their relationship seemed like a fairy tale. 2 beautiful stars at the height of their careers. They purchased a ranch in the San Fernando Valley and, for a time, enjoyed what appeared to be an idyllic marriage. They worked together on several films and were considered one of Hollywood's golden couples. However, the demands of their careers, Taylor's military service during World War II, and their increasingly different lifestyles eventually drove them apart. By the early 1950s, the marriage was strained, and they divorced in 1951 after 12 years together. Despite the split, Stanwyck spoke of Taylor with affection in later years, acknowledging that they had simply grown in different directions. By the mid-1950s, Stanwyck had transitioned successfully to television, starring in The Barbara Stanwyck Show and later in the Western series The Big Valley, which ran from 1965 to 1969. Her portrayal of tough, no-nonsense matriarch Victoria Barkley introduced her to a new generation of fans and earned her an Emmy Award. She embraced television with the same professionalism she had brought to film, proving that she could adapt to any medium and any genre. Throughout her career, spanning 6 decades, Stanwyck earned 4 Academy Award nominations and received an honorary Oscar in 1982 for her lifetime achievements. She was beloved by crew members, respected by directors, and admired by fellow actors for her complete lack of pretension. But there was one person who tested every ounce of that legendary professionalism: British actor Clifford Evans, her co-star in the 1957 thriller The Nightwalker, a film that should have been a straightforward psychological drama, but instead became a nightmare of ego clashes and bitter resentment. When Stanwyck agreed to star in The Nightwalker, she was at a point in her career where she could afford to be selective. She had worked with the best directors and most talented actors in Hollywood, and she expected a certain standard of professionalism. What she got instead was Clifford Evans, a classically trained British stage actor who had recently crossed over to film and carried with him an air of superiority that immediately rubbed Stanwyck the wrong way. From the first table read, it was clear that Evans looked down on American film actors, viewing them as technically inferior to their British theatrical counterparts. He made no secret of his disdain, often commenting loudly about the lack of proper training in Hollywood and suggesting that American actors relied too heavily on personality rather than craft. For Stanwyck, who had learned her trade in the rough-and-tumble world of vaudeville and Depression-era theater, these comments were not just insulting, they were infuriating. He acted like he was performing Shakespeare at the Old Vic, she later told a close friend, when in reality, he was barely competent enough to hit his mark on a film set. The tension escalated during rehearsals. Evans insisted on doing multiple takes of even the simplest scenes, not because he was seeking perfection, but because he enjoyed the sound of his own voice and wanted to demonstrate his range. He would stop mid-scene to lecture the director about motivation and subtext, often in condescending terms that suggested everyone else in the room was an amateur. Stanwyck, who prided herself on being prepared and efficient, found this behavior intolerable. She had worked with legends like Frank Capra, Billy Wilder, and William Wellman, directors who valued her input precisely because she understood filmmaking inside and out. To be subjected to a pompous actor's amateur theatrics was humiliating. What made matters worse was Evans's treatment of the crew. Stanwyck had always believed that everyone on a film set, from the director to the grip, deserved respect. She knew everyone's names, asked about their families, and treated them with genuine kindness. Evans, by contrast, barely acknowledged their existence. He snapped at camera operators, dismissed costume designers, and complained constantly about American production standards. He treated people like servants, Stanwyck recalled years later. That's when I knew I truly couldn't stand him. You can forgive a lot in this business, but not cruelty to people who are just trying to do their jobs. The breaking point came during a particularly emotional scene where Evans decided to improvise, completely throwing off the carefully choreographed blocking and forcing Stanwyck to adapt on the fly. Rather than apologizing afterward, he smugly told her that real actors should be able to respond authentically to unexpected moments. Stanwyck, who had decades of experience and had worked opposite some of the greatest improvisers in cinema, was livid. "Don't you dare lecture me about authenticity," she reportedly shot back. "I was making real films when you were still painting your face for provincial theater." What made matters worse was Evans's treatment of the crew. Stanwyck had always believed that everyone on a film set, from the director to the grip, deserved respect. She knew everyone's names, asked about their families, and treated them with genuine kindness. Evans, by contrast, barely acknowledged their existence. He snapped at camera operators, dismissed costume designers, and complained constantly about American production standards. He treated people like servants, Stanwyck recalled years later. That's when I knew I truly couldn't stand him. You can forgive a lot in this business, but not cruelty to people who are just trying to do their jobs. The breaking point came during a particularly emotional scene where Evans decided to improvise, completely throwing off the carefully choreographed blocking and forcing Stanwyck to adapt on the fly. Rather than apologizing afterward, he smugly told her that real actors should be able to respond authentically to unexpected moments. Stanwyck, who had decades of experience and had worked opposite some of the greatest improvisers in cinema, was livid. "Don't you dare lecture me about authenticity," she reportedly shot back. "I was making real films when you were still painting your face for provincial theater." The crew, who had witnessed weeks of Evans's insufferable behavior, broke into spontaneous applause. It was a rare moment when Stanwyck's legendary composure cracked, revealing the depth of her frustration. From that day forward, she refused to speak to Evans except when absolutely necessary for scenes. She would arrive on set, deliver her lines with her usual brilliance, and leave immediately without acknowledging his presence. The director, caught between two strong personalities, learned to schedule their scenes strategically to minimize contact. When The Nightwalker finally wrapped, Stanwyck made it clear to her agent that she would never work with Clifford Evans again under any circumstances. "I've worked with difficult people before," she said, "but never anyone who combined such arrogance with such mediocrity." He actually believed he was superior to everyone else, when in fact he was barely adequate. In interviews years later, when asked about her most challenging professional experiences, Stanwyck didn't hesitate to mention Evans by name. "Some actors are difficult but talented, and you forgive them because the work is brilliant. Some are difficult and not particularly talented, but at least they're trying. Clifford Evans was difficult, mediocre, and convinced of his own genius. That's unforgivable." The film itself received lukewarm reviews, with several critics noting the lack of chemistry between the leads. One reviewer astutely observed that Stanwyck seemed to be acting in a different, better film than her British co-star. Indeed, her performance was praised while Evans's was largely ignored or criticized for being overly theatrical and out of step with the film's noir aesthetic. Barbara Stanwyck continued working well into her 70s, earning respect and admiration from everyone she encountered. She received the American Film Institute's Life Achievement Award in 1987, becoming only the second woman to receive that honor. But she never forgot Clifford Evans. And when younger actors asked her for advice about dealing with difficult co-stars, she would tell them, "Stay professional, do your job, and remember that talent and character don't always come in the same package. Some people are just impossible, and that's not your failure. It's theirs." Barbara Stanwyck passed away on January 20, 1990, at the age of 82, from congestive heart failure and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease at St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica, California. She left behind a legacy of more than 80 films, countless television appearances, and a reputation as one of the hardest-working, most professional, and most talented actresses in Hollywood history. Her ashes were scattered in Lone Pine, California, in the shadow of the Sierra Nevada mountains she had loved. But among her many memories, both triumphant and challenging, her complete disdain for Clifford Evans remained a testament to her unwillingness to tolerate disrespect, no matter how famous or accomplished the offender claimed to be.